I'm Cassidy Rowan, 32 years old, and if you ever want to understand what it feels like to be a guest in your own family, I suggest being born first, but not male. My earliest memories aren't of birthdays or bedtime stories. They're of being told to wait, to understand, to make room, because Ethan would need those things soon enough. And when he finally arrived, all 6 pounds, 7 ounces of dust and legacy, I was promptly shifted from daughter to understudy. I learned not to ask why my baby pictures disappeared from the hallway, or why my trophies collected dust in a box in the attic, while Ethan's Little League participation ribbons were framed in the den. The message was never shouted, but it was sung sweetly, like a lullaby. Hold this place for your brother, he's going to need it. At 17, I built the foundation for our family business's digital division from scratch. My mother, Meredith, called it cute. At 25, I acquired a competitor and doubled our revenue in a fiscal year. Dad said, "That'll give Ethan a strong start when he's ready." I was CEO in title, yes, but in their eyes, still just the babysitter. This morning, I stood in the mirror and practiced my smile, the one that said, "I'm fine," even when the invitation to my nephew's baptism had arrived with a passive-aggressive, "We hope you'll be able to take a break from work." As if that company wasn't the only reason Ethan and his wife could afford their custom nursery and 2 vacations a year. I pressed a crease into my blazer sleeve and told myself, this day would be civil, controlled, brief. The church ceremony would be harmless enough. My nephew was sweet, and Ethan, to his credit, tried to include me in his orbit when our parents weren't orchestrating things. But the reception would be a show. My parents had rented out the country club ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, white roses, a string quartet, all that for a baptism. I knew better than to think this was about the baby. This was about Ethan. Again. Always. As I walked through the front door of my childhood home, my heels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome of dread, the smell of old polish and fresh coffee hit me. Meredith appeared around the corner, lips pinched in what she thought passed for warmth. "You look tired," she said, by way of greeting. "Don't they give you time off at that company of yours?" "That company of mine. That I own." But I only smiled. "I make time," I said. Ethan breezed down the stairs just then, all charm and confidence, baby monitor in one hand, tie still unknotted. "Cass," he grinned, coming in for a hug. "Thanks for making it." As if there were ever a choice. The three of us stood in a triangle of forced familiarity, Meredith already glancing past me toward the window, no doubt watching for the board members she'd invited to today's event. Because nothing says family bonding like using your grandchild's baptism to stage a corporate pageant. My father, Charles, stepped in from the study, clasping Ethan on the back with that proud, possessive smile I hadn't seen directed at me since, maybe ever. "Big day," he said, ignoring me completely. And just like that, I faded into the furniture. Again, the stained glass windows spilled morning light in jewel tones across the marble floor of St. Raphael's, and still, it all felt gray to me, the kind of gray that settles in your bones and hums softly. Like silence after a slammed door, I sat in the front pew, not by invitation, but because the usher assumed "daughter" meant welcome. He didn't know better. I didn't correct him. The godparents sat across the aisle, glossy and beaming, whispering to each other about Ethan's baby like they were discussing the second coming. My mother gave them a slow nod of approval, eyes narrowed just enough to signal ownership of the whole production. My father leaned in to the priest like they were old friends, as if this entire ceremony were another business meeting he'd already closed. The organ began its slow swell. Everyone stood. I stayed a second longer than necessary, adjusting my sleeve, bracing my face. Ethan walked toward the altar holding his son like a trophy. Gentle, yes, but reverent too. His wife, Callista, flanked him in ivory lace, glowing in the way new mothers glow when the spotlight hits them just right and nothing else has started to fray yet. The baby squirmed, chubby fists batting at the lace near his cheek. His name, Oliver James Rowan, echoed from the priest's lips as water was poured over his head in solemn trickles. A holy moment. Sacred, at least on the surface. But I could feel it. The shift. The subtle choreography. The glances passed between my parents and their friends. The way my father clasped Ethan's shoulder with a little too much ceremony afterward, murmuring words that felt less like blessing and more like benediction. He's the future. That was the message wrapped up in candlelight and hymns. Ethan. His child. The continuation. The culmination. Not me. Never me. When the priest dismissed the family from the altar, the applause started before anyone else had even moved. Applause. For a baptism. Only in my family would a sacrament double as a press event. I clapped politely, quietly, my hands folded before anyone noticed how hollow it sounded from me. As we exited into the sunlight, Meredith looped her arm through mine with practiced ease. "The reception will be lovely," she said without looking at me. "We're so glad you could make time." A smile, thin and sharp, slid across her lips. "The godparents are quite fond of Ethan. And of Oliver, naturally. You'll want to stay for the toast." It wasn't a suggestion. I nodded, heart ticking faster behind my ribs. She had that look again. The one she wore before a shareholder meeting where the board was about to be blindsided. Something was coming. Something planned. I glanced at Ethan, who was holding Oliver like he already knew what legacy meant. And for the first time, I felt the weight of my own name slipping quietly from the family's lips, being folded up, filed away. The reception loomed like a cliff I was being politely escorted toward, and they expected me to jump. The reception hall smelled like champagne and curated approval. White roses sprawled across every surface like someone was trying to bribe God with floral arrangements. A string quartet played something vaguely classical near the windows, but it was the laughter, pointed, polished, that filled the space like a second soundtrack. I stood near the entrance for a moment, scanning the crowd for a place to exist. There wasn't one. Ethan was surrounded, of course. Men in suits I'd seen at board meetings now slapped his back and cooed at the baby like Oliver had already closed his first deal. My mother moved through the room with a glass of Prosecco and a hostess smile, weaving threads of charm and politics with every step. She stopped only to murmur things I was never meant to hear, but always did. "Cassidy? Oh, she's always working. No time for family, you know how it is. Brilliant with numbers, but not much for nesting. And the one that never failed to draw tight-lipped nods, she's focused on other things." My title never made it into those conversations. CEO. Majority shareholder. The woman who'd saved the company from a hostile acquisition 3 years ago. That part stayed unspoken, buried under the soft-serve narrative that I was still figuring things out, while Ethan, baby in one arm and stock portfolio in the other, was the beacon of family continuity. I moved to the bar out of survival instinct. A splash of something dry, chilled, and anonymous in my hand helped dull the static. Just long enough to make it to the far end of the room, where the less important relatives hovered, the cousins whose Christmas cards I never received, the aunts who called me intimidating, in the same tone used for serial killers and spinach. "Oh, Cassidy. We thought you might be too busy to come," Aunt Lorraine chirped, squeezing my arm with more force than affection. "We were just saying how impressive your little company is." "Still going strong?" I smiled tightly. "Still leading the family business, yes. Not so little." She blinked. "Right. I suppose you do have a title. For now." It was like that all afternoon. Every conversation a velvet knife. Compliments curved just enough to draw blood without being called out for it. A lifetime of practice in passive execution. I danced through it with the same old grace I'd taught myself as a girl. Never let them see you flinch. Never let the mask slip. But every comment chipped something. Every nod toward Ethan's natural leadership, even though he still had to Google basic financial terms, cracked the casing around my patience. Callista found me by the pastry table, clutching a baby bottle and her usual brand of brittle kindness. "You know," she said, not looking at me, "I really admire how independent you are. It must be so freeing, not being tied down with a husband or kids, just you and your spreadsheets." I took a slow sip of champagne. "Freedom's funny like that. You never miss what you haven't been taught to want." She blinked, then offered a tight smile and floated off. I watched her go, heart drumming in a steady, low rhythm. This wasn't new. This was tradition. This was what they did, build walls around Ethan, then decorate the bricks with my achievements like souvenirs from a sibling they barely tolerated. But today was different. because I could feel it coming, a shift in the air, a sharpness behind the orchestration. They weren't just cutting me out, they were planning something, and the knives were getting longer. I didn't mean to hear it. I wasn't lurking or snooping, not intentionally anyway. I'd only stepped into the side lounge to breathe for a moment. My head ached from too many smiles and too few truths, and I needed silence. But instead, I found my parents. They hadn't seen me. The door was cracked an inch, just wide enough to betray them. Meredith's voice came first. "It has to be tonight. We've built the moment perfectly. Ethan, the baby, the godparents, the board. She won't make a scene. Not with the priest blessing her generosity." Charles grunted in approval. "She'll be too stunned to object. Public commitment is binding, especially in a room full of our investors." I froze. Every instinct screamed to leave, to slam the door and make noise, demand clarity, but I didn't. I just stood there, back pressed to the wall, listening as my parents plotted the cleanest theft of my life. "She's always wanted a stage," Meredith said, and I could hear the ice in her smile. "We'll give her one. For a performance she can't undo." "And what if she refuses?" Charles asked, voice low and clipped. "She won't," Meredith replied, certain. "Not in front of the baby's godparents, not in front of the board. She has a reputation to maintain." I think that's what did it. The word reputation. As if that's all I had left. As if my work, my sacrifices, my leadership, the long hours, the hostile acquisitions I warded off, the fact that I spent 5 years building the digital infrastructure that now carried the weight of the entire family business, could be reduced to decorum. They were going to announce it. Tonight. On a microphone. In front of our entire world. They were going to hand over my company. My company. Like a baptism gift to Ethan. As if I was a vessel. A placeholder. A woman-shaped pass-through for legacy to flow from father to son. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not until their voices faded and the door clicked shut behind them. Back in the reception hall, everything glittered with the illusion of celebration. Ethan bounced Oliver gently, smiling at guests like he'd already won something. Maybe he had. Meredith spotted me across the room and raised her glass. A wink just for show. Charles was whispering to one of the board members, nodding toward the microphone at the front of the room. Something in me locked into place. Fine. Let them raise the curtain. I'd play my part. But they'd forgotten one thing about performances. The one holding the spotlight controls the story. The marble in the country club bathroom gleamed with the kind of perfection money buys. The kind no one ever really sees unless they're hiding. I stood at the sink, hands braced against the counter, watching myself in the mirror. My reflection looked calm, almost bored, like a woman waiting for dessert. But beneath the surface, every nerve buzzed. I had 15 minutes, maybe less. I could feel the shift in the reception room, the way people started drifting closer to the front, how Meredith's heels clicked with ceremony as she made her way toward the mic stand, how Ethan's posture had adjusted, straighter, prouder, like a man about to inherit the world. They were setting the stage, and I was meant to smile through it. I dabbed the corner of my eye where mascara threatened to betray me. Not from sadness, from fury. The kind that simmers until it welds steel into your spine. They thought I'd let them do it. That I'd stand there, gracious and obliging, while my life's work was packaged in a speech and tied to Ethan's newborn like a corporate rattle. I thought of all the ways they'd rehearsed this behind closed doors. The gift, language, the applause they expected, the board members conveniently present, the priest ready to offer a hollow blessing. They were counting on two things, my silence and my dignity. But here's the thing. Dignity doesn't mean surrender, and silence isn't the same as consent. I took one last look at myself in the mirror and fixed the collar of my blouse, smoothing the fabric until it lay clean and sharp against my collarbone. Let them speak. Let them shine their lights and pass around their praise like hors d'oeuvres. They were about to learn something I'd spent a decade mastering in boardrooms full of men who underestimated me. The quiet woman at the edge of the room is always the one you should worry about. Because by the time she stands, it's already too late to stop her. The clink of a knife against crystal quieted the room faster than any announcement could. Heads turned toward the front of the hall where my father stood, microphone in hand, eyes alight with the false warmth he saved for audiences. Friends, family, Charles began, his voice booming just enough to own the room. What a beautiful day. Guests murmured agreement, glasses lifted in soft cheers. I didn't move. I couldn't. My hands gripped the table linen in front of me, knuckles bone white under the table. I look around this room, he continued, and I see loyalty. I see tradition. I see the kind of legacy that doesn't just pass through bloodlines but through character. Ethan shifted beside him, holding baby Oliver like a torch. Callista smiled, that practiced smile of someone who had already heard the speech in rehearsal. Charles glanced toward me. I met his eyes and didn't blink. For 35 years, our family business has stood not because of profit, he said, pausing just long enough for effect, but because of principle. Because we believe in putting family first. My mother stood at the edge of the platform, nodding like she'd written the line herself. Maybe she had. And today, Charles went on, we continue that legacy. We make a gesture not of business, but of love. I felt it then. The shift. The final note before the chord drops, he raised his glass. As a blessing to our grandson, as a gift of faith and future, our daughter, Cassidy, has chosen to transfer her shares in the Rowan Company to her brother Ethan. The room erupted before the lie finished leaving his mouth. Applause. Cheers. A standing ovation from one corner of the room. Callista's hand went to her chest in faux surprise. The godparents beamed like saints at an altar. Ethan turned to me, all humble smiles and smug gratitude. Even the priest gave a slow, approving nod from the side. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I didn't move at all. Because I wasn't stunned. I was ready. They'd set the trap. But they've forgotten. I don't play games. I haven't already won. Applause thundered through the room like judgment wrapped in gift paper. People rose from their chairs, clapping and smiling, eyes on me like I was a bride walking down an aisle I'd never agreed to. Glasses clinked, hugs extended toward Ethan, congratulations flying like rice at a wedding I wasn't invited to plan. Cassidy, someone beamed, what a stunning gesture. A true matriarch in the making, said another, squeezing my shoulder. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. The praise felt thick, like syrup poured over a corpse. Callista pulled me into a side hug that smelled like expensive baby powder and too much perfume. So selfless, she whispered, like she was letting me in on a secret. This really means so much to Ethan. Ethan himself came toward me next, arms wide, his face full of the kind of gratitude only liars wear well. I don't know what to say, he said, voice shaking for effect. You didn't have to do this. I mean, thank you. He hugged me. My arms stayed at my sides. Across the room, I saw the priest nodding as if I'd just been canonized. My mother dabbed at one eye, milking emotion she didn't earn. My father was already shaking hands with a board member, using phrases like succession, vision, and long-term strategy. Everyone believed it. The performance was airtight. And yet, there I stood, unmoving, silent, watching it all unfold like a slow-motion car crash I'd seen coming for years. The woman to my left leaned in and whispered, "You've always been so generous. I suppose it's easier when you don't have a family of your own." I turned to her, finally, smiled, took a sip of champagne, said nothing, because my silence was no longer submission. It was strategy. Let them applaud, let them cheer, let them believe they'd just rewritten my legacy. The curtain hadn't fallen yet, and when it did, it wouldn't be me standing in the ruins. It would be the ones who thought I'd give up everything just to keep the peace. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. All it took was 5 words. That's false. I never agreed. The words fell quiet but sharp, slicing through the final ripple of applause like a scalpel. It was the silence afterward that really spoke volumes. Forks paused mid-air. Champagne stopped mid-sip. The pianist, sensing the shift in atmosphere, let his fingers hover above the keys like they weren't sure they should play anymore. My father blinked. Once. Twice. Meredith's smile froze so hard it cracked at the edges. She opened her mouth, then closed it, a blink too slow. Ethan. Ethan had the nerve to laugh, as if I were making a joke. Come on, Cass, he said, still trying to hug the lie into truth. You don't have to, I said, I repeated. I never agreed to give Ethan my shares. There's no transfer, no deal, nothing has been signed. Now the silence turned to murmurs. Confused. Curious. A few gasps. Someone in the back muttered, "Wait, what?" Meredith stepped forward like she could fix this with posture. "Cassidy," she said sweetly, "don't be dramatic. We've discussed this many times." "No," I said, voice steady as steel. "You've discussed it around me. About me. Never with me." Charles recovered next, slipping into the tone he reserved for junior executives who dared question him in meetings. "Let's not ruin a beautiful moment with misunderstandings." "I'm not ruining anything," I replied, my smile measured and precise. "I'm correcting a lie." Ethan's face flushed a new color. He tried to chuckle again, but it stuck halfway in his throat. "Cass, it's for Oliver. For the family. This is about securing his future." "And I'm not his mother," I said calmly. "I'm not his trust fund. I'm the majority shareholder of Rowan Industries. And I don't make business decisions based on catered events and surprise toasts." The room held its breath. People were watching now, phones discreetly raised. Board members whispering. Godparents frowning. My mother's hands tightened around her champagne glass like she could squeeze the rebellion out of me. "I didn't agree," I said, slowly this time, letting each word fall like a weight. "And I won't be coerced." That was the first time the hush turned electric. Not awkward, not stunned, charged. Because now the game was real, and they'd just learned I wasn't the pawn they'd hoped to parade, I was the player, and I'd just made the first move. "You always do this," Meredith snapped, her voice slicing through the tension like a whip. "Always making everything about you." She stepped toward me with that look. The one I knew from childhood. The one that meant she was about to slap me with her words, not her hands. "You just had to ruin it, didn't you?" Her voice was brittle glass sharp now. "You couldn't let Ethan have this one moment?" A few relatives gasped. Others began whispering. All eyes were on us. I didn't flinch. "I'm not ruining anything," I said softly, deliberately. "I'm protecting what's mine." "Mine," Meredith repeated, her smile curdled now. "There it is. That's all you ever care about, yourself." Ethan moved beside her like a carefully placed pawn, his expression wounded, eyes wide with disbelief. "Cass," he said, his voice cracking at the edges, "this isn't just about you. This is about my son. Our family. Don't you care about us at all?" I let the words hang between us like smoke. "This was supposed to be a gift," Meredith continued, her tone now high and desperate. "You'd be remembered for your generosity. You'd have shown you were more than just—" "Than just what?" I interrupted, my voice like ice cracking across a pond. Meredith stared at me. "Say it," I said. "Go ahead." She didn't. Instead, she turned to the crowd, to the board members, the priest, the godparents, the polished strangers pretending to be kin. "She's always been difficult," she said to them. "Always so, resentful of Ethan. Of our family. She doesn't want children. Doesn't want a husband. She has no one but that company." There it was, the blade they'd been waiting to use. And she swung it with pride. "She doesn't need the shares," she added. "She has nothing to pass them to." The gasp that followed wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. Disbelieving. The kind of gasp that doesn't come from surprise, but disappointment. I stood still, letting the wound open without bleeding. Because I wasn't broken. I was just done pretending. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I only looked my mother in the eye and said, "You never built me to be family. You built me to be a placeholder." And today, they were learning. I was never temporary. I was just patient. Ethan turned, facing the room like a pastor at a pulpit. "She's doing this on my son's baptism day," he said, voice trembling just enough to pull sympathy. "She's making it about money. About power. This was supposed to be about family." He looked at the priest like he expected divine backup. "We wanted to honor her," he continued, gesturing helplessly. "We wanted to recognize everything she's done. But instead, she's humiliating us. Humiliating our son." I watched as Callista dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Subtle. Effective. The priest folded his hands in concern. The godparents exchanged quiet, uncomfortable glances. Somewhere, someone hit record on their phone again. I could feel it. the tide shifting. She's never cared about us, Ethan said, staring at me now, full of betrayal. She's never made time for birthdays, for holidays, for anything that wasn't about control. My father stepped forward, face red, voice strained. Cassidy, this is your brother. Your blood. His son is our future. Family comes before greed, he said, louder now, for the crowd. Always has, always will. There it was. The rally cry. I scanned the room. Guests who had applauded minutes ago now looked uneasy, confused, uncertain where to stand. I recognized the look. It was the same one I'd seen in board meetings right before a vote turned. She doesn't even have a family of her own, Meredith added, and this time her voice cracked. She chose her career over connection, over love. A slow murmur passed through the room, like smoke crawling over silk. I looked at them. Every last one of them. The people who'd watched me build, succeed, lead, and now stood silently as I was shamed for doing it alone. And yet, I wasn't angry. I was awake, because in that moment, I finally understood. This wasn't about love. It never had been. It was about erasure. They'd hoped to rewrite me out of my own story. And now they were learning what happens when the author refuses to hand over the pen. My father had always been the composed one, the strategist, the closer, the man who never raised his voice unless it was to seal a deal. But now? Now, he was shaking. This is shameful, Charles barked, stepping toward me like proximity could rewrite reality. You want to humiliate your family? On the day of your nephew's baptism? He didn't wait for an answer. You ungrateful child, he snapped. You wouldn't even have those shares if it weren't for this family. I tilted my head, calm as glass. You mean the shares I bought? The crowd murmured again. I built the digital arm of the company, I continued. Negotiated our two largest acquisitions. Rescued it when your legacy was bleeding red. You didn't gift me anything. Don't twist this, he spat. This is about your brother's child, about continuity. You're making it about yourself, as always. And you, I said quietly, are making it about control. His voice rose again, desperate now. Just sign the papers, Cassidy. Give him the shares. Do the right thing. A few guests gasped. Someone near the back muttered, papers? So that was the plan. Announce the transfer. Pressure me in front of an audience. Slide a contract under my hand while the priest was still offering his blessing. You brought legal documents to a baptism? I asked, louder now. You plan to spring this in front of investors, godparents, and your own grandson? Charles turned red, flushed out. His mask was cracking. Don't shame us, he hissed. Family comes first. Always. You owe this to your brother. You owe this to us. No, I said, and the word came with the force of a gavel. I owe me. Silence. Everyone watched. And in that stillness I saw it. The unraveling, the illusion of unity, of legacy, of patriarchal infallibility, undone by a daughter who simply said no. They had tried to orchestrate a ceremony, but I had just buried the performance, and this time, I wasn't the one being baptized. I was the one doing the cleansing. You're making a fool of yourself. Charles growled, voice low and burning, his hand trembling near the edge of the podium. This isn't strength, Cassidy. This is cruelty. No, I said, this is clarity. The guests began shifting, eyes darting between me and the family they thought they knew. The priest stood frozen by the cake table, his mouth slightly open, one hand still gripping a blessing that would never land. Cassidy, Ethan said again, quieter now, pleading. We're talking about my son. His future. You're not entitled to someone else's future just because you have a child, I replied evenly. Being a parent doesn't make you a CEO. Ethan's face collapsed. The polished facade he wore for press releases and christenings crumbled into something real, panic. Charles tried again, grasping at authority like it could still save him. You'll regret this, he said, louder now. In front of all these people? You want to be remembered this way? I want to be remembered for the truth, I said. Meredith, brittle and furious, turned toward the board members. You all know what she's like. This isn't new. She's always been difficult, always been cold. I let the insult land, felt the sting, let it roll away. Then I took one step forward and let the room have it. You raised me to serve this family like a bridge, I said. To carry the weight, to build the future, to hold things together until your real heir arrived. And now you want to burn that bridge for a press release, gasps echoed through the hall. You didn't invite me to share. You built a trap. You weaponized ceremony. And you thought I wouldn't call it what it is, theft in lace gloves. No one clapped now. Not even the ones who had smiled at me earlier. No one moved. Even the champagne felt flat in their glasses. I took a breath and steadied my gaze on my father. I am not your placeholder. I am not your pawn. And I am not signing a single thing. Charles stood there, jaw locked, fists clenched. A man watching the empire he thought he controlled slide out from under him like sand through calloused fingers. And then, for the first time since I was 17, I turned my back on him in front of an audience. I didn't flinch, didn't rush. I walked back to my table, sat, and waited. Because the truth had been spoken, and now the reckoning was theirs to live with. I didn't need a microphone. I had the silence. The kind that wraps around a room like smoke and makes every word land like a match strike. I own those shares, I said, rising again, voice low but deliberate. Every percentage point. Every vote. Every line of equity. Not a gift, not an inheritance. I bought them, I built them, I earned them. Charles tried to speak, but nothing came. Not even the fury. Only a slow, slack-jawed blink like a man watching a bridge go up in flames that he swore wouldn't burn. I was 24 when I took a risk and bet on our name, I continued. Not because you asked me to. Because I had to. You were drowning. And instead of saying thank you, you spent 10 years trying to erase my fingerprints. A few board members looked at one another. Not whispering, weighing. Meredith crossed her arms, chin tilted high. This is a family company. And I'm family, I said, even when you didn't want me to be. I turned to the crowd, letting them see me. Not polished. Not perfect. Just clear. This isn't about a baby, I said, or a baptism. This is about a hostile takeover disguised as a toast. And if you all want to believe that's tradition, that's loyalty, that's love? I shrugged. Then we define those words very differently. Ethan's hands dropped from Oliver's tiny frame. Even he couldn't look at me. Charles took a breath, mouth opening again. Likely to threaten, maybe to beg. But I cut him off. I will not be sacrificed on the altar of your legacy. And with that, I stepped away. Past the godparents, past the cake, past the priest who looked like he'd forgotten what sanctity was supposed to mean. I walked through the center of the room, steady, clean, untouchable, while the empire that once dismissed me now scrambled to figure out what I'd just done. I didn't need applause. I didn't need forgiveness. I had something better. Control. A throat cleared behind me. Then a voice. Crisp, familiar. Cut through the thick air like a scalpel. If I may. Heads turned. Including mine. Marcus Klein stepped forward, one hand tucked in his blazer, the other holding a document folder. The last person my parents expected. The first person I'd ever trusted to read the fine print as sharply as I did. He smiled. Not smugly, not showily, just enough. I'm Marcus Klein, legal counsel for Rowan Industries and a sitting board member, he said. And I'd like to clarify something on the record. Charles stiffened. Meredith's lips parted slightly, as if tasting the first drop of blood in the water. Ms. Cassidy Rowan's shares are not only valid, Marcus continued, flipping open the folder. They are contractually protected under a clause added to the shareholder agreement in 2018. He held up the page like it was scripture. Clause 4C, no transfer, sale, or reassignment of shares may occur without express, documented consent from the majority stakeholder, free from coercion, manipulation, or reputational duress. Any breach constitutes grounds for legal action and voids the transaction in full. He turned to the crowd. In plain English, you can't trap her. Gasps bloomed like sudden rain. Ethan's mouth opened and closed. Meredith reached for Charles's arm, but he was already ghost white. Marcus looked directly at them. Attempting to force or fabricate a share transfer in public, especially during a religious ceremony used as social leverage, qualifies as coercion under this clause. You would be in breach. Cassidy would have legal grounds to invalidate every action taken in this room tonight. Someone from the board whispered, "She planned for this." No, I thought. I prepared for this. Because I knew. One day, they'd come for what they thought I didn't deserve. And I made sure they couldn't take it without a war. "Everything said here has been recorded," Marcus added, nodding toward the phones still raised in cautious silence. "Including attempts at manipulation. Including threats." He looked at me now, with quiet pride. "You did well." I nodded once. My breath was steady. My hands didn't shake. Because I wasn't just standing my ground, I'd fortified it years ago. They thought I wouldn't fight. They forgot I'd already won. Charles staggered back from the podium like the floor had shifted under him. His hands, once the ones that signed deals and directed futures, now trembled at his sides. "No," he muttered. "That clause wasn't. You didn't tell us." "You didn't ask," I said. He lipped smaller somehow. The man who once loomed behind every decision I made now shrunk beneath the weight of one sentence written in a document he'd never bothered to read. Meredith stepped beside him, her voice tight, controlled. "Cassidy, this isn't necessary. We can discuss this privately." I raised an eyebrow. "Privately? After you tried to publicly gift my life's work without my consent?" A wave of murmurs broke through the crowd. Ethan stepped forward then, but the charm was gone. The mask was cracked. "Cass, we didn't know about that clause. You didn't have to blindside us." I turned toward him. "Did you think announcing the transfer without my consent wasn't a blindside?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marcus cleared his throat again. "Everything that's happened here tonight, every manipulation, every false statement, was documented, witnessed, and now memorialized in video." He looked directly at the board members. "Any attempt to retaliate against Ms. Rowan would be a breach of fiduciary duty, and I assure you, legal consequences would follow." Charles dropped into a chair behind him, like a man watching his legacy unravel thread by thread. Meredith's fingers clutched her pearls like prayer beads, still trying to hold on to the illusion of control. And Ethan? Poor Ethan. Just looked confused. Like he'd never imagined the golden cradle could ever tilt. The priest backed away quietly. The godparents no longer smiled. Guests began slipping toward the exits, their curiosity morphing into discomfort. The empire had cracked, and they were trying to gather the shards without getting cut. But it was too late. The performance had ended, and the audience had seen everything. No one clapped anymore. They just watched. The once roaring room was now paper-thin quiet, holding its breath around the wreckage of my family's performance. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, bows suspended like they were afraid of becoming accomplices. Charles stared at the tablecloth in front of him like it might offer an escape clause. Meredith's eyes darted between faces, her lips tight with the desperation of someone who couldn't figure out why her charm wasn't working anymore. And Ethan. Ethan didn't speak. He just held Oliver closer, as if the baby could shield him from what had just happened. I stood near the center of it all, not triumphant, just still. I hadn't wanted this. But I wasn't sorry. A guest, one of my father's oldest business partners, approached me slowly, glass still in hand. He nodded once, respectfully. "Smart clause," he murmured. "Quiet power move." I didn't smile. "Just protection," I replied. "Sometimes the same thing," he said. Behind him, a board member excused himself from Charles and walked straight toward Marcus. Another followed. The room was realigning, cell by cell. Not with noise, with silence. The kind that means calculation. The kind that follows power when it shifts. And all of it. Every nod, every whisper, every retreat from my parents' orbit, landed with surgical precision. Because the truth wasn't just out, it had stuck. The illusion of my family's control had shattered. And the pieces weren't being swept up, they were being studied. And no one, not Charles, not Meredith, not Ethan, dared look me in the eye again. By morning, the video had already been reposted 47 times. Different angles. Same explosion. The moment Charles said gift. The moment I said no. The clause. The fallout, the silence, viral isn't the right word. It was surgical, intentional, weaponized by truth. Marcus forwarded me the first headline at 6:32 a.m. sharp. Parents attempt public hostile takeover at infant's baptism. Daughter shuts it down live. Another followed. Inheritance or theft? Woman exposes family coercion at luxury baptism party. I didn't post a single word. I didn't need to. Screenshots did the speaking. The phrase, "she didn't even agree," had already become a meme. In one clip, a guest whispers, "This is, honestly, iconic." It looped with subtitles and reaction videos on 3 different platforms. And buried deep in a late-night repost, I caught the moment Meredith realized she was being filmed. Her face turning away too slowly, too late. Marcus called from the firm. "They're panicking," he said, voice dry as ever. PR firm pulled out. 3 board members want an emergency session. I sipped my coffee and looked out over the city skyline. They thought they could control the narrative, I said. Now they're a cautionary tale. He chuckled once. "Told you the clause would come in handy." "It wasn't the clause," I said quietly. It was finally refusing to stay quiet. Meredith had taken to social media in the worst way. Passive-aggressive stories and vague quotes about betrayal. But the internet wasn't kind. No one bought her grieving mother routine. And the comments under her posts? "Maybe if you raised her better, she wouldn't have outsmarted you." Imagine losing a company to your own daughter because you tried to steal it at a baptism. This is Succession, baby edition. I didn't laugh. I just let the flood come. Because this time, the spotlight wasn't theirs. It was mine. And I didn't flinch beneath it. The conference room was glass-walled and silent, except for the slow click of Marcus's pen against the folder in front of him. 48 hours, he said. My father wasn't in the room. Neither was Meredith. Not yet. This wasn't for them. This was for the board. This company cannot operate under the shadow of public coercion, Marcus continued, his tone precise, almost bored. The optics are catastrophic. And the shareholder protections were clearly violated, at least in spirit if not yet in court. He looked around the table, nodding at the few members who dared meet his eyes. A public apology. One from Charles Rowan, issued within 2 business days. Clear. Unconditional. Or we convene a formal vote of no confidence to remove him as acting chairman. He turned slightly toward me. And Cassidy will remain majority shareholder, without dispute. No one objected. No one even cleared their throat. Because the silence now belonged to me. I sat straight-backed, fingers laced loosely in front of me, the same way I had 10 years ago when I was first invited into this room, not as daughter, but as disruption. Today, I wasn't a guest. I was the reckoning. Marcus closed his folder, the sound deliberate, final. 48 hours, he repeated. And as we stood, I felt the shift begin, slow and unstoppable. The empire was no longer theirs to run, it was mine to rebuild. The cameras were already rolling when Charles sat down. He looked smaller, thinner in the frame. Not from age, but from exposure. This wasn't a legacy speech. It was a surrender. "I would like to begin by apologizing to my daughter, Cassidy Rowan," he said, reading from a paper that shook just enough to betray him. "My actions at last week's family event were inappropriate, coercive, and do not reflect the values this company stands for." The word coercive landed like a gavel. His eyes didn't lift once. I attempted to orchestrate a transfer of company shares under public pressure, disguising it as celebration. It was wrong. And I accept full responsibility. Somewhere off camera, Meredith was probably seething. Ethan had vanished from public view altogether. Charles swallowed. Cassidy Rowan is the majority shareholder of Rowan Industries. Her leadership has carried this company through growth, reinvention, and crisis. I regret failing to recognize that publicly until now. He paused, throat working. I ask our partners, our clients, and our staff to respect her role, and to move forward under her vision. The screen dimmed. Apology complete. Script executed. Damage mitigated. Barely. I stood just outside frame, hands folded, watching it play out. He never looked at me. I never looked away. Because this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about fact. About letting the world hear it from his own mouth. That I wasn't temporary. That I wasn't a stand-in. That I wasn't his. I was mine. And now? So was everything else. The door clicked shut behind me with the soft finality of a chapter closing. My heels echoed on the polished floor of the office I'd walked past for a decade. The corner suite. The view. The seat at the top. It had always been his. Until now. I didn't rush. I took it in. Every square inch of wood paneling and silence, every echo of decisions I wasn't invited to make, every ghost of meetings I'd carried from behind a closed door. I ran my fingers over the edge of the desk. Solid. Mine. The leather chair creaked slightly as I sat, not because it resisted, but because it recognized something had changed. I opened the drawer. His nameplate was still there. Charles Rowan, Chairman and CEO. I lifted it, felt the weight, the vanity. Then I dropped it into the box beside the trash without ceremony. I pulled out my own, simple, no flourish, just the name that mattered. Cassidy Rowan. I placed it on the desk, straightened it, then I leaned back in the chair and looked out across the city. The skyline I'd climbed, not by legacy, not by inheritance, but by fire and silence and steel. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This was mine now. Not because they gave it to me, but because they tried to take it. And failed.